All right. All right. Well, welcome to, and thank you for everyone joining us tonight. My name is Kirsten Bannister, and I am the treasurer of the Shoreline Special Needs PTA. This meeting is being hosted by the Shoreline Special Needs PTA through generous donations from our Shoreline community. So thank you so much for that. And we're going to be recording this presentation, and it will be available on our website in a couple of days, hopefully within 24 hours, but I like to give a little bit of a buffer. You can find out more about our group, the Shoreline Special Needs PTA, by visiting our website, which is shorelinespecialneedspta.org. And we'd love to have you join us as a member so we can continue to advocate for special education and disabled students throughout the district. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. As we get started, just a reminder, housekeeping, to put your questions in the chat, and the co-hosts are actually going to feed those questions to Laura throughout the meeting. We're going to keep everyone muted unless Laura instructs us otherwise. And as a reminder, because we're recording this meeting, we really want you to be careful and not using your child's name or school or teacher or program, as that information will be public on this recording. As a longtime board member of the Shoreline Special Needs PTA, I often get referred to families who have students that are struggling in school and have a lot of questions about how to help their students. One of the topics I found that comes up a lot is around dyslexia. Caregivers are confused and concerned as their students have reading challenges, especially in the younger grades. If a student has a dyslexia diagnosis, they want to know how the school can help. And I'm really looking forward to learning how that's possible tonight. I couldn't be more delighted to turn the time over to Nikki Beck, a fellow board member who will introduce our speaker, Laura Rogan.
Hi, I'm Nikki, and I'm so excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Laura Rogan. Laura, a fellow Shoreline resident, is here tonight to talk to our PTSA members and others in the Shoreline community about dyslexia. Laura has a Master's of Arts in Clinical Psychology from the University of Colorado and a Master's of Education in School Psychology from the University of Washington. She's a reading therapist, educator, and counselor who has been working in the field for more than 25 years and has created a multi-sensory word analysis curriculum called Wired for Reading, which is designed to improve reading, spelling, and vocabulary. Wired for Reading is one of 2 programs currently accredited here in Washington by the IMSEC, or the International Multisensory Structured Language Education Council. Laura works directly with students of all levels and abilities and their families from Shoreline and beyond to address areas of need in reading and spelling support in a super fun and engaging way. Additionally, she provides training in the Wired for Reading method to educators, tutors, and families by offering a series of courses. So welcome, Laura. I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm delighted to be giving this talk to my fellow community in Shoreline. I've given this talk over many years, and actually I've been adding to and changing as research has been just pouring in lately. There's been a whole bunch of research in the last 5 years, especially. And this was a talk that I originally put together with my co-author, Jenny Block Garcia, for the International Dyslexia Association local branch about 12 years ago. And as I said, we've been adding to it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the talk. Get ready, though. I'm going to be asking you questions and we're going to have you put it in chat. Okay. Oh, now it's not working. Great. I tested it earlier. There it goes. All right. So dyslexia is actually far more common than people realize. It affects 20% of the population. 80 to 90% of those with learning disabilities have dyslexia. It's the most common of the neurodiversities that you see. And so early intervention is absolutely critical. So The one thing we know is that when you get to it earlier, then the repercussions from having lack of access to print is diminished, but it is absolutely never too late. So what I always tell people is that you want to get started as soon as you possibly can, but don't feel discouraged if your child is older and you are just now learning about having learned that your child has a learning difference. Okay, so breaking down the word dyslexia, I think that when I first would give this talk, people would look at me like I had said Voldemort. I moved from Colorado and I'd say, well, maybe your child has dyslexia, and they would gasp. And I'd have teachers that would say, you know, we don't use that term. And I was so flummoxed by this. And then I just kind of realized that part of what happened is people didn't understand what dyslexia meant. So if we think about what the term means, I want you to look at DYS and notice that that is the Greek spelling. I think sometimes when we hear dyslexia, we think of the Latin spelling of DIS. So I want to just put it in your body what the different meanings are. DIS, as in disability or disagree, means not, opposite, away, and has a very negative connotation. And I think that's why sometimes people react to it. But DYS, is actually Greek-based, and it just means difficult. So if you guys are, I know I can't see you, but go ahead and humor me because you'll remember it better. Just say difficult, difficult. And that really is authentic to what it feels like to have dyslexia. It's difficult, and lex means word. So this is the American sign for word. So when you break it down, it just means I have difficulty with words. And it's really a word level difficulty. It's when we talk about reading is a complex task, and we're going to hone in on what is causing this difficulty. Okay, to dive into this, we are going to walk through a real child that Jenny and I worked with. This is Max. Max is just starting kindergarten, and everybody was so excited for Max because he was the kind of kid that would tell you all about dinosaurs. He loved to watch shows about them and read books about them, and everyone's like, wow, he's going to love kindergarten. So he gets into kindergarten, and he really is just not liking it very much. He's avoiding wanting to go to school. He's not wanting to do any reading during reading time. He's kind of not wanting to hold the pencil. And about halfway through the year, people are starting to kind of wonder what's going on. And by first grade, they're identifying him for maybe needing some extra help with reading. So what happened with Max? So this is the working definition. Please don't be overwhelmed. I actually have a few goodies that I'm going to be sharing with this group that you'll be getting later. I have a chapter that's out of my book that talks about everything I'm going to talk about tonight, and I got a couple charts to help break this down. But this is the working definition of dyslexia, and it's one that's been adopted into the DSM and is also being adopted in some federal law. So I'm going to break all this word of text, wall of text down for you. So first thing is dyslexia is neurological in origin. So if you could put into the chat, what does that mean when something's neurological? This will help you remember it. And Nikki, if you could let me know what people are putting in the chat. I'm waiting. You guys will remember it better if you put down what in the chat. What does neurological mean?
I have one person that has put in brain-based.
Yay, that one person. Yay, Hermione. Okay, great. So if we were in person and live, one thing we know from from working with adults and learning is I need to do some active engagement, and it'll help you remember. So I normally would have you turn your shoulder partner, and I'd say, oh, I heard you say the brain. So the way that converts over in a webinar is I'm going to have you write it into the chat. So be ready to type some observations into the chat. Yes, dyslexia is a brain-based neurodiversity, and it's not expected. And so at its core, it's difficulty with accurate and or fluent word recognition. It's a word level disability. Its core deficit is in something called the phonological component of language. Now you guys, forgive me. Greek is how people get grants. So they always use these big Greek words to describe these things. So I want to break down the Greek. Could you please point to your ear and then say phono, phono. Phono means sound. And then logical is, are you aware that there's a logic to our sounds? And that's the core deficit of dyslexia. This will always impact spelling, and it impacts spelling in a very particular way that I'll explain. So this is at its core a word level reading disability. And so there's often secondary problems with comprehension, and children may also have some vocabulary difficulties. Let me give you an example of what I mean by the secondary comprehension. I'm going to say a sentence and I want you to put in the chat what it means. The land in Montana is expensive. So can you put in the chat what I just said about the land in Montana? What does it mean? The land in Montana is expensive. So Nikki, what are they putting?
The land costs a lot.
Oh, you know what I meant to say? What I meant to say was the land in Montana is expansive. So I changed one phoneme from expensive to expansive, and it made my comprehension get messed up. And that's what they mean by secondary comprehension. The child will misread even by one phoneme, one sound difference, and it can change the whole meaning of the sentence. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, so the dyslexia as a term is in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, and it is on page 67. And I put this in here because there was a time when it wasn't in the DSM, and therefore it wasn't a protected disability, but it is in the DSM and it is a protected disability for 504 purposes. And this is what they say. It's an alternative term used to refer to a pattern of learning difficulties, characterized problems with accurate and/or fluent word recognition. So it's pretty much word for word from the working definitions from Reedline's work. And then they also talk about ways that you can diagnose dyslexia. It doesn't have to just be a discrepancy model. They talk about how you can look at an individual's developmental, medical, educational, and family reports. Dyslexia tends to run in families. And I can give you the percentage of how inheritable some of the processing issues are. And this is something that they've also recognized, that you'll have a child who maybe is something called twice exceptional, where their performance on high order skills will be very high. So they won't have a discrepancy that will qualify them for special education, but they do show the processing issues and they are having an adverse impact and be able to participate in maybe programs. So these are children that would benefit from a 504. So some myths. Dyslexia doesn't mean you have below average IQ. It doesn't mean you've had poor teaching, and you want to rule out any emotional issues. You also want to check their hearing and check their vision to make sure that you're not seeing somebody having trouble because they're having a hard time and they need glasses. I had a student who was in my reading group when I was in teacher training, and he did not have dyslexia. His issue was we were his third school and he was only in second grade. So he had had so many switching schools that he wasn't getting a consistent access to being able to learn how to read. So you want to be really careful when you're doing diagnostic work that you look for the processing issues and rule these things out. So there's a myth out there that dyslexia is more common in boys and girls. It's actually not true. Here's my biggest one. If you get nothing out of this talk but this, I will have done my job. Please write this down. Just humor me. People with dyslexia, it's not that we see things backwards. I myself, I didn't disclose that at the beginning, but I have dyslexia. It's how I got involved in all this. And what happens with people with dyslexia that makes it seem like we're seeing things backwards is we have low order sequencing problems. So we get sounds out of order, we'll get letters out of order, and we'll get graphomotor or motor sequencing out of order. So let me explain to you what this means. Have you ever been in an aerobics class? So Nikki, if you have, just go like that, thumbs up. So Nikki, are they doing thumbs up? Have you been in an aerobics class? Yes, thank you, Susanna.
Yes, lots of thumbs up.
So one time when I was in aerobics, the instructor went this way and I went that way. Have you had that happen to you? Okay. You did not see the instructor backwards, but you got your motor sequence backwards. And that's what people with dyslexia are doing. That's why our S's are backwards sometimes. Instead of making the sequence in the way that makes the S look the way it's supposed to, we get it backwards. So seeing things backwards isn't what's happening. It's that we're having low order sequencing problems. We already talked about that. You don't outgrow dyslexia. I have dyslexia and my son has dyslexia. And interestingly, we participated in a University of Washington was doing a dyslexia genetic study, and they asked, hey, anybody in your family that's willing to come in, we'd love to have y'all come in. And they did a whole bunch of different tests. And my parents were in town, and my mother was diagnosed with dyslexia at age 70. My father was diagnosed with dysgraphia at age 75. So they hadn't outgrown it, but you can learn strategies to keep it from being a boulder blocking your path, and instead maybe being a pebble in your shoe. The other thing that is really important to keep in mind is that if you have a treatment that doesn't specifically involve reading, it's not curing dyslexia. So be careful, because you'll go onto the internet and see all sorts of crazy things out there. And you just don't want to waste the time and money and energy on something that isn't going to be proven to work. Now we're just having fun with our PowerPoint. Okay, so this is what it looks like when Max is reading text. So you can see what the text says above, and then you can see what he said below. And so he had some words he was able to sound out and decode, but then he had words that he wasn't familiar, and he really wasn't sure how to read them. He also took longer to read this than we were expecting. So if I'm doing an assessment, I go, I'm getting a red flag here, but I'm not still sure what exactly is causing the barriers. So then I start to look at the single word reading, and that's where things start to become clear. For example, I want you to take a look at the word pen. Now you guys are going to have to humor me out there. So everybody, I know I can't hear you, but you have to do this with your ears and your mouth and your eyes. Say the word pen. Okay. What's the last sound in pen? All right, you hold in the Good. Can you please tell me what part of your mouth is working when you say Your lip, the tip of your tongue, or the back of your tongue? And put that into the chat. This is really important. This is going to get to kind of the core thing. What are you using? What are they saying, Nikki?
Yeah, tip.
Fantastic. You guys got it. It's the tip of the tongue. Now, can you tell how the air is coming out of the body? When you say, how's that air getting out of your body? Get out your ears, out your nose, or out your mouth? What are you noticing?
Out your nose. Out your nose.
All right, to test this. Now, don't do it if you have a cold, but to test it, say, and plug your nose. And you'll notice that the sound stops. So that linguistically is called, we're going to call it a tip nose. They would use a big fancy Latin term if you were taking linguistics. But the fact that that N has a tip is the reason why Max is mixing up pet with pen. Say t. You're using your tip. So because they both use the tip, the sounds seem similar, and kids will mix them up. At the core, phonological awareness is mixing up sounds, often because they have an overlap in how we produce them. So that was like, aha, I'm seeing a phonological mix-up. The other mix-up you'll see is with vowel sounds. So you can see that Max is misreading that vowel sound. Could you guys please put into the chat how many vowel letters we have in English? How many vowel letters? I can see you guys going. So Nikki, what are they saying about how many?
We have 5, a 6.
5 or 6. I like that. I mean, I count Y. So if you count Y, you get to 6. A, E, I, O. You counting Y gets to 6. Okay, here's an interesting question. How many vowel sounds are there in English? Nikki, just pull some numbers out and I'm going to do higher or lower. I want everybody to know how many vowel sounds before they leave this today. What are they saying? Isn't it weird how we don't know? How do we not know this?
12, 16.
That was so logical.
17.
Whoever said 12, very good. It is higher than 12.
30.
Lower than 30. Somebody who said 17 is getting really close. That's one more than that. Did they do it? You
16,
have 17.
24.
If you have 17 and I'm telling you to go up one higher.
18. We got 18.
Woo! Write that down. Write it down. We have to know how many vowel sounds we're dealing with. I think that's one of the things that we run into. Children should leave kindergarten knowing how many vowel sounds we have. And so we have a problem in English in that we don't have enough vowel letters for all of our vowel sounds. And that makes vowel sounds, reading them, learning them, spelling them much harder compared to other languages where there's 5 vowel sounds, 5 vowel letters, and it matches on beautifully like in Spanish. So I'm not surprised that Max is having problems with those vowel sounds. Okay. So we know that if children are not having this exposure to different types of spoken language in early development and childhood, that can impact how they're able to perceive sound and order. That's why it's so important for children to have access to nursery rhymes and to people reading to them. I'm going to skip through this part. Not sure why it's gone to this, you guys. I want to get to the processing issues. I worry about some of that other stuff giving us not enough time for the processing issues. Okay, so here are the different processing issues, the low order processing issues that I wanted to get to, make sure we didn't run out of time. Phonological awareness is the one we know the most about and that we can do the most about. And we're going to talk about each one of these. Phonological memory is related, but slightly different. And you can have kids that have difficulties with one and not the other. Orthographic processing, I apologize for the Greek name. We will break down what that means when we get to it. And then something that luckily has a normal name, rapid naming. So these are the 4 big processing issues that you see with kids that are having trouble with reading and spelling and getting to kind of the root as to what was going on with Max. So let's talk about phonological awareness first. There's different components that have a developmental sequence, but I'll be honest with you, this developmental sequence starts at age 3 and extends until about 5 years old. So most kids come into kindergarten with an ability to have a phonological awareness umbrella with all of these components. The first thing kids can do is rhyme. So if you say, what rhymes with bat? Can you guys put in some things in the chat? What rhymes with bat? It should be easy. I'm throwing you a softball.
Cat, hat, hat, sat.
Great.
Mat.
Good. So what I noticed with my son, Liam, when he was 4 years old, and I said, Liam, what rhymes with bat? And he said, ball. And I said, okay, because I know that dyslexia tends to run in families. And at that point, I had been diagnosed with dyslexia. I didn't even know that my parents were going to be diagnosed later. But I was like kind of noticing some red flags with Liam. So then the other thing that we know that preschoolers can do is they can track their syllables. Now, syllables at its essence is a beat. So if you guys could clap with me, that's what a syllable is. It's just how many beats are in a word. And that's why when you have kids do syllable counting, a lot of times you have them clap. The problem with that is, especially for someone like me, is I'm clapping and I'm like, how many times did I clap? I can't keep track. Plus, I have a hard time with syllables. I'm notorious with my spelling to drop beats, syllable beats, and then try to spell a word that has like 4 syllable beats and try to spell it like it has 2. So what I've learned to do is put the beats on the body. And this is one thing that has gotten really out there. I think a lot of people have know about this. It's so helpful. So I'm going to show this to you because this will help your spelling too. If you misspell something and your spell check comes back and goes, I don't know, no replacements found, it should have that emoji of this. I know what you're trying to spell. So it's probable that you left out a syllable beat. So what I want you to do right now is put the syllable beats on your body. 1 beat, you're going to put your hand. 2 beats are going to get your elbow. 3, you get your shoulder. And then, usually then you can track your syllables. And most words stay here. Occasionally you get up to your head. If you get over here, you're getting into the really big kid words. So my name is Laura. I have 2 beats in my name. Figure out how many beats you have in your name. I know Jessica, Susanna, Amanda. Most people, a lot of you have 3. So this is a great way to be able to help cue your child if they're having trouble with spelling, for example. Have them check to make sure they have a syllable beat. And here's a fun fact. Every syllable beat has a vowel sound. So you can check to make sure you have a vowel sound for all your syllable beats and they're in the right order, and that will help your tools work better. But if you have a child who's having a hard time with those syllables, like I did, where I was going tarantula, tarantula. Can you guys please put tarantula, the real word, beats on the body? Tarantula. I was missing 2 beats and my spell check didn't know what I was trying to do. So being able to track rhymes, being able to track syllables. If you have a child who's having trouble with either of those, that's a red flag. Onset and rhyme is, can you tell what the very first sound is in a word? Anything before a vowel. And then the rhyme is anything from the vowel sound on. So I'm going to say a word. I want you to put into the chat what the onset is. The word is coil. So Nikki is going to let me know what people said.
See?
Excellent. Or k, because you're just giving me the sound. Very good. All right. Then what is the rhyme from your vowel sound on? What are you going to say?
Oil.
Excellent. Okay. So that's onset rhyme. Again, this is something that you come into kindergarten and you're able to do this. So if you have a child, what they say is, because you want to consider developmental, there's some degree of developmental spread that's perfectly normal. If you get halfway through kindergarten and you have a child who's having a hard time with onset and rhyme, it is not our jobs to diagnose, but it is our jobs to notice that there's maybe a temperature and take somebody to the doctor if we're noticing that they have a fever. So to me, if you notice any of these, it's like you're going to red flag or something's not quite right. And you do want to maybe have some further screening or looking into what might be causing them to have, and especially if you're noticing if they're having trouble with reading and spelling. But the good thing about this is you can catch this in kindergarten, because all of these you should have in kindergarten. The hardest of the phonological awareness is segmenting. And that's actually where they say segmenting and manipulation is where you get the most bang for your educational buck. So that's where I tell teachers, whoosh, get right to segmenting and doing sound manipulation to make sure that you're really, really helping develop these skills. And segmenting would be to be able to keep track of all the different sounds inside of a word. So can you guys put the number of sounds in the word coil? Be careful. The number of sounds in the word coil. Okay, Nikki, when they've done it.
Got a lot of 3s.
Excellent. Okay, so and you can see, because English doesn't have a fair matchup with sounds and all our letters, that we actually had to use 2 letters to represent that oi sound, but it counts as k, oi, ol, 3 different sounds. So that's your phonological awareness umbrella. And if you see a child struggling with any of these things, I'd say red flag, and it is the core deficit of dyslexia, according to the research. So the types of errors that you'll see, you're going to see children mess up their short vowels. And unfortunately, a lot of phonics programs start with short vowels because short vowels are the easiest to teach and understand when it comes to letters. But unfortunately, they're the hardest to hear and feel and see with sounds. So I'm going to prove that to you. I'm going to make all the short vowel sounds, and you're going to watch and see how easy it is to tell them apart. I, a, ah. So there's all your short vowel sounds. They're pretty close, aren't they? Between quits and quest, watch this. I, eh, I, eh. Would you guys say that's a big difference or small? Very small. Okay, so I don't like to start with short vowels when I work with my students. I like to start with what's called the universal sounds. And they're the sounds that are in every language. So this is great for my students that are ELL because I know they make this sound in their native language. And it's a great place to start for my kids that are ELL and my kids that are vulnerable with dyslexia. And it's just the easiest place to start. So I'm going to teach you the 3 universal sounds. Are you ready? Here we go. I want you to smile the cheesiest smile you can. E. Write down E. E is a universal sound. Every language on the planet has E. Now I want you to open wide like I'm a doctor and wants to see the back of your throat. Ah. Ah is a universal sound. And then I want you to make your lips as round as they can possibly go. Ooh. Ooh is another universal sound. E, ah, ooh. You can think of that old witch doctor song. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah. They use all of the universal sounds. So that is where I start. Watch E, ooh, compared to eh, eh. You can see that it's much easier to hear, feel, and see the universals, and you're going to be doing a more comfortable, inclusive way of teaching phonics if you start with those. But seeing my students mix up their short vowels, classic. The other classic thing I'm seeing in my little guy's spelling response is he's doing a classic mistake that they actually talked about in several research. Not only does this mistake happen in English, but the researchers said that this was the most common mistake they saw in English, French, and German. So it's something that is happening universally in those languages. And that is, this child is not hearing a consonant blend very well. He has the word junk and he is saying jug. He is not catching that sound. Another one I see all the time is they'll say the word jump and they'll spell it without the M. And that is a classic. They'll have the word self and they'll leave out the L. So leaving out the inside after a vowel sound, like so coming at the end of the word, that's where you tend to see it. The other thing I see this child doing is getting sounds out of order. He's getting his sounds out of order at the end of quits versus quest. And he's leaving out part of his blend in several words. Then I give them nonsense words and I tell them about 14 times that they are not real words, they're made up words, and they still try to make them real words. They kind of guess at them. So quibs became gremlins. That's a real response from a real student. All right, so this is an actual child spelling test. And you can see that when they were a child, I talked to him about huffs and he was sounding it out really carefully. And he got the H and he got the V. And he said, well, I knew it needed a vowel, so I put in an O, which I thought was adorable. I had a student once tell me that whenever a word doesn't look right, she slaps an E on the end because there's E's on the end all the time. And I'm like, okay, it's true, but we got to learn why we put those E's. By the way, I want you to go into your mouth to figure out what's going on with that V versus that F. Can you make a V sound for me? Now make an F. You are literally doing the same thing with your mouth with those sounds. You're using your lip and the air is kind of coming out in a flow. And the only difference is right here. Make the V sound, and now make the F sound. One of them is considered a whispered sound and the other one is voiced. So F and V, I see kids mixing them up because they're really close. P and B has the same thing, T and D. So when you see those, they're really, really close linguistically, that's actually a red flag. My little guy got his M missing in champ, and he's missing some short vowel sounds, and he's got his sounds out of order with swish. So he is showing me all sorts of phonological awareness evidence in his spelling. All right. So before I go into phonological memory, can you please put in the chat 1 or 2 things that you just learned about phonological awareness? What are some of the core things that we look for? Because it is the core deficit. So what are some things we see if a child is showing phonological awareness? Nikki's going to pay attention to what you guys put down. Read it back to me. We'll see how well that worked.
Rhyming and blends.
They have trouble with rhyming. That's definitely a red flag. Yes.
Leaving out letters.
Yeah, and I want you to, you're right. That's the way it'll look, but really it's leaving out sounds. But you're right, because you'll see it in the evidence that the letters will be missing, but they're missing. It's a sound thing, probably not a letter thing, although it could be. We'll talk about the letter thing too. So leaving out sounds, having trouble with rhyme. Here, let me give you guys a hint. Whoop.
Having problems deleting letters. I think
yeah, they'll leave.
Yep,
they'll leave those sounds out. They'll add sounds in, by the way, too. They'll put sounds in that aren't there. That's another one you'll see. And they'll swap. Yeah, they'll swap the sounds out. Exactly right. The big one to look for, starting in about 2nd grade, you shouldn't be seeing kids leave out that middle sound of a consonant blend in those 1-beat words. So if you see them writing jump without the M, or land without the N, or self without the L, that's a big red flag past 2nd grade. There's a little bit of a developmental, it's normal when they're littler, but once they get to be about 2nd grade, you shouldn't be seeing that as much. Okay, I'm going to move on to phonological memory, but take a couple notes because I'm going to do the same thing. Make sure it's sinking in.
Yeah.
So phonological memory is your memory for something that goes into your ears and it doesn't make sense to you. It's rote. So I think all of us are getting really bad at our phonological memory because of our phones. How many of you just go, oh, I'm just going to take a picture of it, and you're not like necessarily remembering things by rote auditory? Well, I don't know, but there are times where you really do need to have that rote auditory to help you learn. One would be if you're sounding out a word. I'll see kids go computer, and then they don't remember what they already sounded out. They've forgotten it. If you give them, if you tell them how to spell a word out loud, THOU, I mean, you might as well be going LMNOPQ. I mean, it just makes no sense to them. They can't keep track of the auditory letters. Phone numbers is rote auditory. So 206-367, you're like 37 what? You all, math facts. I see kids that have dyslexia and they also have dyscalculia or trouble with math. But when you dig in there, it's really math facts. And the math facts could be because of this with phonological memory. And also there's another processing area that pops up. So 6 + 8 this is a very rote auditory thing unless you use manipulable so the kids can actually see it. And verbal directions can be another one where they know they're supposed to go upstairs, but they don't remember why. So these are examples of what you'll see with phonological memory areas, with the rote auditory memory is kind of weak. This is one of the components of the working memory. So I will get reports back and it will say that the child is having working memory issues. And often it's because of the phonological memory being weaker. Another one you'll see is if you're giving a spelling test, they'll go, what was the word again? And you'll say the word, what was the word again? They can't hold on to the word long enough to be able to spell it. So I'm going to actually have you test yours. It's going to be hard because you guys could just write this down and then the test won't work. So don't write it down. Okay, here we go. Here's my phone number, by the way. 206-234-7331. Okay, say the phone number out loud. Let's see how well you did. Some of you went, I don't care. I'm too tired. But that would be a test of phonological memory. So being able to repeat numbers, that's just a straight up test of phonological memory. And you can see it's not related to intellect. It's a low order process, but that's one of the ways that we get information into our working memory. And then our working memory goes, is this important? No, dump it. Is this important? Yes, save it. Doesn't even get in there. It can't get saved or dumped. And the way we do it in school psychology, I was a school psychologist and neuropsychologist in my formal training. And we would give kids nonsense words and they'd have to repeat them. So here I go. I'm going to give you a nonsense word. Ready to repeat it? Instructor mamble. Repeat the word. Here's the word. Hopefully I remember the word. Wouldn't that be ironic? All right. Did you remember it? We tend to want to make it into a real word, but it was a made up word. So that's actually something where they actually have an audio tape, and then you record the student's response and how well they are able to repeat back nonsense words. Okay, so before I move into this next processing, let's talk about phonological memory. Please put in the chat, what did you just learn about phonological memory? Because that's another one of the low order processing I see all the time with my students with dyslexia. They have poor or difficulty with rote auditory memory. So Nikki, tell me what they're kind of blasting back at you. What are some things that you just learned?
It doesn't make sense when you hear something, having trouble with math facts, can't hold on to a word, trouble following directions, forgetting instructions, can affect math facts, core or recall spelling issues, working memory and holding on to details.
Excellent. Okay, I want to clarify something and I can understand why the confusion came in. One of the things that they've noticed is that students could have a very good ability to hold on to information that's meaningful. So if they're listening to a teacher talk about a topic that interests them, they may be riveted and can tell you all about it. So that's not phonological memory. Phonological memory taps into your ability to hold on to something you hear that doesn't make sense to you. So it's a phone number, it's the spelling of somebody's name, it's directions, it's a word you've never heard before. It slips away before you're able to remember it and hold on to it. So the interesting thing is your high order auditory verbal could be very high and very strong, but your low order can be really weak. And that's one of the things they actually look for. They sometimes will test for that. They have a couple of different tests they can give, like what is your auditory memory for meaningful? And they have you repeat back sentences. And a lot of my students will do really well with that. So it's fascinating. It's really when it's rote auditory. Rote doesn't mean a lot to me. Spewing back a rule can be very rote to kids. They don't understand why they're spewing it back. They're just knowing they're supposed to spew it back, but that might be really hard for them. Okay, I'm going to demystify the Greek in this next processing issue. You see where it says ortho? Can you guys kind of chunk that out? Ortho. Where else have you heard ortho? Maybe orthodontist. So if you think about what the orthodontist does, they straighten your teeth, right? So ortho has something to do with straight or rules. So I'm going to have you guys just humor me. You'll remember it better. This is the American sign for rules, and straight. And I always tell teachers when I do this, use your teacher voice. Like you're out at the recess and you're going, ortho, keep it straight and follow the rules. And that'll help you remember ortho. And then grab your hand like it's a piece of paper, grab your fingers like it's writing with a pencil. Graph means write. So orthographic means, are you familiar that there's rules to writing? We use EW in the word blue when it means the wind blew. And we use UE as a rule. It's just a rule when it's the color. And that's just a rule that you basically get into your sketchpad, into the part of your working memory that holds on to visual imagery of letters. And if you see the word enough times, it goes in. And then other times you can learn it because someone has taught you the rule and you practiced it. So there's multiple ways to get that rule, that orthography into your brain. I would like for you to tell me how you spell blue. Now, obviously, you guys don't have enough information, right? Can you eliminate any? You have got visual images of the word blue in your head, and you could probably get rid of, well, at least one of them. And Blu-ray's gotten so uncommon. So I would get rid of the OO. We just don't spell blue that way. And the blue with the U by itself, we don't do that. And then you need to know some meaning to be able to make your choice. Are we talking about the wind, or are we talking about the color? And then that starts to get into really, really, really detailed issues with orthography, where you have to know homophones or words that have different spellings to show different meanings. So this is the core deficit or a core difficulty for people with dysgraphia or having difficulty with writing. And about 70% of people with dyslexia also have dysgraphia. They two really travel together all the time. Okay, so I'm going to give you a test for you guys. Please don't write it down. Try to just really just do this with your eyes. So look at this word. What was the third letter? Okay, I don't know. You guys, I have a terrible orthographic coding ability, but that's how they test it.
A
They
lot
show
of O's.
Okay, we're gonna go with O. This is why I had trouble with spelling. So I have dysgraphia. So I have a really hard time. I'll see a word and you take it away and I don't remember the word. I'll look at it in the screen here and move over here and I've forgotten it. So this is something where if you have a strong visual memory for letters, this is a wonderful gift from the gods, and it means you're probably a good speller. So for example, can you close your eyes and imagine the word cantaloupe? Anybody out there? Just do this if you're somebody who can do that. Or if you're like me. No, can't see the word cantaloupe. How about, let me do an easier word. Can you imagine the word they? As in they were coming to the store. Okay, that one you can imagine. So some of you are like, okay, I can do they because I've seen it enough, but cantaloupe was a little tricky. Some of you are like, oh, I can see either one of them. And what color do you want me to make the letters? And you can make them sparkle. If you can make them sparkle and change color and stuff, you have a very strong sketch pad for letters. It's a working memory thing. I point here because we know where it is in the brain. It's probably on the left side in the visual occipital lobe. And you can be very grateful. It makes it much easier to spell. But if you're somebody like me, and that's just not my thing, I have other strengths, but that one's really tricky for me, then I'm going to have trouble with spelling. And then that's going to make it difficult for me to write. So the types of errors you see, so cute. They try to sound out their sight words. Those sight words really, really throw them for a loop. So they see the word could and they're going cowled, they're trying to make it say what it's supposed to say. Or in the word eat or eat, hello, it's ate, I just did it. Or they say where for were, very for every, even saw for was, very well may be related to orthographic processing. I want to say a word about the word 8, as in the number. That word is not fair. That word is what we call a sight word. Some people call it a heart word. I call it a sketch pad word. You got to just know it. That word used to be fair. It used to reflect the way we talked. We used to make a GH sound in English. If you go back to Old English, I'm going to teach you how to make it. Make sure you swallow. You want to spit. That's the sound. If you speak German, you're probably doing it more authentically. We don't make this sound in English anymore, but we used to. So if you see a GH in a word, you got yourself a ghost. You got yourself a really old word, and it probably is haunted, and probably you can't sound out. So that's why thought, through, though, I call those OU ghost words, because you have an OUGH. And the way we pronounce it has changed, but the way we spell it reflects the way people talked long ago. I say this to my students, and then I need to give them some strategies to deal with it. By the way, one of my lessons that I do, I have free on my website. It's called Sketchpad Spelling. I learned it through research right here at the University of Washington. I also have put the lesson into Koala, which is a free online tutoring platform. You can go in there and you can get Sketchpad spelling words and different strategies to address this. It's based right out of the research at UW. Belongs to the people. So kids tend to have really, they tend to be pretty phonetic when they're spelling. Can you guys read this? The worst thing was riding in a car with a baby screaming and whacking me in the face. This is an actual child spelling. And they're doing a pretty good job of getting their sounds in the right order, but they don't know some of the spelling conventions and they don't know some of their sight words. Okay, so before I go into the last of the processing issues, could you please tell me what you just learned about orthographic coding? Orthographic coding, what was that one about? Orthographic. Blue versus blue. Remember the word 8 as in the number. So what are they putting, Nikki?
Rules for writing, writing rules, learning the rules.
Yep, it has something to do with the visual. This is the one that has to do with your
rules.
So you write in your notes, this is your ability to see the letters in your mind's eye. Phonological is a different part of your brain, and it has to do with being able to hear sounds in their order and being able to hear syllables in their order. A lot of kids have both of the processing issues, but sometimes I'll have kids that have one and not the other. Okay, so we're going to go into rapid naming. Yay, they didn't use Greek. I want you to imagine that your brain is like Costco. You've got all these filing cabinets in that Costco. Can you imagine that? And all those filing cabinets are hooked up together like a web. And you have a librarian in there, and the librarian's job is to go fetch things when you need it. Now, I want to tell you what this isn't so that you don't confuse, because a lot of times when I do this before, people would think that rapid naming was the same as word finding. Word finding is different. Word finding is when the librarian cannot find the word anywhere. So we've all had this. This is mommy head. This is when you've been too busy and you're juggling too many things. I had it really bad when I was pregnant. I could not find nouns to save my life. I tell my husband, I need the thing that's round that you eat with. Hungry. And he goes, you need a spoon? I'm like, yes. I couldn't come up with spoon. That's word finding. That's not what this is. These kids will be able to say spoon, and they'll be able to say, my sister's what she was studying for the law bar, and she couldn't come up with the word library. And I'm like, you need to go to bed. So that's word finding. Okay. That's not what this is. Rapid naming is how quickly you can pull that word when you need it. So you've got your librarian and you need a word. Do you have Dash from The Incredibles? Or do you have, I always think of, okay, I'm dating myself, you guys, but do you remember Tim Conway doing the whole like grandpa thing going, oh, go get that for you. So do you have Tim Conway fetching the word, or do you have Dash? And a lot of us have somebody just on roller skates. But how quickly you can name something is called your rapid naming. And they can actually measure this really young. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Oh, I guess first I'm going to show you what it looks like on reading fluency. I jumped to the next slide. Okay,
Right.
true kiddo. Yeah, go ahead, Ricky.
Oh, sorry. There's a question if it's the same as word recall.
No, word recall would be your ability to be able to pull that word. This is a speed issue. So they can recall spoon, library, thermometer, but they just take a little bit longer pulling it. So there's a recall speed rather than a recall issue.
Thank you.
So this was one of my actual students. Notice that he's missing the grammar words. He read parasite perfectly. He read the word wait with no trouble. He struggled with some, also, and this. I hear this all the time from parents, and I go, red flag, rapid naming. If they miss the little words but are able to read the bigger words, that's a red flag for rapid naming. And that may be where they're pretty accurate, but they're going to have some reading fluency, and we're going to need to do some fluency training. So this child also took longer. So what's going on? What does it look like? I want to show you what this is not the actual test, but it kind of gives you a sample of what the test is like. They give you a bunch of letters. The best measure is letters because we get lots of practice with letters. It really gives you your potential for growth. They give you the letters and they say, okay, Nikki, I would like you to read the letters going this way across as quick as you can. And I time her. So then she would go, you want to try it, Nikki, just so they can see what it's really like? Just do the first row.
Sure. DYSDXIAYL.
So you see, she just went through and she named them pretty smoothly. And I can measure her, and they've normed this, and they can look and say, compared to other people your age, Nikki, you were right at the 50th percentile, right? What my kids with rapid naming problems sound like, because I've given this test quite a lot, is they sound like this. D, Y, S, D, X, I, A. So there's just this, they're not that, you don't get this going. D, Y, S, D, X. There's this delay and this struggle. When you have this issue, what we know from the research is that you can look at their rapid naming for objects and compare it to their rapid naming for letters, and that gives you your potential for growth. But this is one of the processing issues that doesn't respond well to intervention. It is something that they said is kind of fixed. And if you have a child who has this issue, the important thing that they have is accommodations, especially as their reading and writing load increase, and also especially for math facts. You see this with math facts. My daughter has rapid naming. This is the only little spot where she's got a little blip. She doesn't have dyslexia, but she has a little rapid naming issue. And I'm not surprised, because when she was little and we'd work on math facts, she'd go like this. 2 times 4. You want to know what 2 times 4 is, and I'm Zoe, and I'm going to tell you. So she's stalling. She did this whole production while she was stalling, and she'd go 8. My son would have a lot of problems with this, and until we got him a calculator, math was a nightmare in my house. It was just tears, and it was so hard. As soon as it was okay to use a calculator, it was like a complete game changer for that kid. And he went on to be an A student in calculus. But if you talked to him in 3rd grade, he thought he was terrible at math. And so I will tell you, with rapid naming, especially for kids with math, the rapid naming for math facts, can I just tell you honestly that one of the number one things that we can do to help these kids, once they've learned it, you want to make sure they've learned it. Once they've learned their math facts, if they're still like a kind of slow, that may just be that's who they are. You know, my son, 20th percentile was about as fast as we were going to get according to the tests. He just takes longer to get stuff done. Give him a little extra time and he's fine. But having a calculator for those kids is like having glasses. And I'm noticing that not everybody in this room has glasses. So those of you that don't have glasses, do you mind taking them off, please? If you have glasses, please take them off. Yeah, take them off. Thank you, Jessica. Take them off. Take them off, Nikki. Oh, that's much more fair. Now we all are in the same spot. No, you guys are like, no, let them put their glasses back on. Put your glasses back on, of course. So just know that for a bunch of kids out there, having a calculator is like glasses. It's all it is. It's not giving them extra help. And my son, it was said it was kind of like he called it his distracting math, because he'd get anxious. Because he'd be like, oh my God, I can't remember what 2 times 8 is, and I've got to do this big problem. If he had the calculator there, he'd calm right down. So I know I'm making a big deal, but boy, I've seen calculators just make such a difference here. Okay, before I move on, what did you just learn about rapid automatic naming?
The speed issue, and it's fixed.
Yeah. Accommodations are really important. I can get kids faster. I know what to do to help them with those little grammar words. I kind of know what's going on, and I can get in there and work on it some, but it's a stubborn one. All right.
You can name the words, but need extra time. And ability to recall facts quickly.
Yeah, and just write down calculator.
Yes, we just had someone calculators for the win.
For the win. Okay, so what I find is I tend to get kids that have more than one processing issue. You can have double, triple, or quadruple deficits is what they, it's interesting. The researchers are starting to get away from words like deficit and starting to talk about neurodiversities, which I really like. This is something that came from Dr. Beringer. She was my advisor at the University of Washington. And she said, this is something I can share when I do talks. So this is what they found, that dysgraphia, dyslexia, and then something called OWL, which is kids that had difficulty with processing language, more of an SLI. Okay, so what do we need to do for kids that have dyslexia? Well, we need explicit instruction of phonological awareness in the alphabet, explicitly teach them phonics in a structured way, explicitly monitor and teach fluency, explicitly teach vocabulary strategies and comprehension. And then they are adding a new one, something called morphology, and that is teaching kids that there's little meaning units inside those longer words. So the word teacher is comprised of two meaning units, teach and a person who, teacher. That really helps, that helps kids across the board.
Laura,
So
there's a question wondering if
Sure.
apraxia falls into this as well.
No, I do sometimes see that travel, but apraxia isn't something that is, I did a meta-analysis of the common comorbidities or co-occurring issues, and apraxia was not one of them. So kids with dyslexia, we need more repetition. One of the secrets is, and this is true for all learners, but especially people with dyslexia, make it playful, and the synapses in the brain can be cut exponentially. So instead of having to see something 300 times, you can see it 30 times if it's done through play. So repetition through games and play, working on fluency, teaching them that there's little meaning parts inside words, giving them instruction that comes in from all the senses. That's why I've been doing my hand. I'm going to have you pay attention to your mouth. I'm going to have you see it. I'm going to have you write it. I'm going to have you say it. I'm going to have you talk about it socially. I'm getting multi-sensory instruction. I need to make sure I work on reading, writing, and spelling at the word, letter, sound, letter, word, sentence, and passage. So I move it all the way up. And I want to get you out of controlled readers, which are valuable, but they're a little bit contrived. So I want to move you out of controlled when you're ready and get you into real literature experiences as soon as possible. As a matter of fact, with my students, I have them simultaneously do something like Learning Ally, which if you haven't heard about that, I'll make sure I get the information to Nikki and Kirsten about Learning Ally. It's a great resource for you where kids can have the text lit up as it reads it, and it's real humans reading it. It's a nonprofit, and it's wonderful for kids, especially for fluency. And then I want to be really courteous to their intellect. So when I'm working with my students with phonological processing and they're in 4th grade, I'm like, hey, I'm teaching you linguistics. Usually don't get this until you're in college, and you're getting it now. How cool is that? So I'm really trying to make sure I gear the instruction to be courteous to who they are as a person while I'm working on low order processing. There are some strengths with having dyslexia. This is the big push that's been happening in the last 10 years. They're finding that people that have dyslexia, they have these strengths that can be found both in tests and in the brain. So there's a whole bunch of different types of strengths, and people with dyslexia don't have all of them. The Dyslexic Advantage people said that there's spatial reasoning strengths, which is totally completely there, but not the most common. But I will tell you that IBM has a whole unit of people to work with dyslexia because so many of their employees have dyslexia. The really common one is big picture thinking. People with dyslexia, our local roads aren't as strong, so we're not good with details, but our super highways across our brain are really strong. So we see big pictures and connections the way other people don't. We're also big storytellers. We'll tell you all about what happened at grandma's party, and then you did this and I did that, and then you did this and we had this ice cream, and you're like, how do they remember all this? They'll remember these events like crystal clear and they can't remember the rule, or they can't remember how to spell the word they. And they're very good at thinking on their feet. They tend to be a little bit more risk takers, according to the people at the University of California, San Francisco. They did tests and they found that there were substrengths of higher order verbal that they found, some substrengths of higher order spatial skills that they found in some kids. But what they found across the board in all the dyslexic people they studied, people in prison, people in preschool, people in elementary school, people in college, they said that all of them had an emotional receptivity that was remarkable. And I say they read the room better than they read the page. And these are people that the way the study was elegant. They would show a YouTube video and they would measure the brain and the responses in the body, as well as the responses visually. And they found that, like, for example, they show a child giggling, they were holding like an Etch-a-Sketch and the child was giggling. And the person that didn't have dyslexia was like, and the person that had dyslexia was like, like, so they just felt it and could feel it. And this is a vulnerable strength, especially during COVID time, because they read that room and they can tell that something's not right. And the teacher's a little upset and I'm not sure what's wrong with my friend, but they're catching all of these emotions and they're not always able to quite understand and process it. So we as adults want to really be careful that we put them in an environment that gets them, because they will thrive when they're in a dynamic environment that gets them, but they'll also be really vulnerable if they're in an environment that doesn't get them.
Laura, we have a question about if there's a comorbidity with ADHD, since a lot of these strengths are also strengths.
Yes. Is it okay if I talk about comorbidities at the end?
Absolutely.
Wait, and actually I have a chart that I'm sending to you, so it's coming, which I broke all those comorbidities down. So I'll get to that. That's a really good question. One of the problems that we're finding is that people that don't have access to outside testing or outside tutoring sometimes are left behind. There's a disproportionately high number of people with dyslexia who are in prison. So there's a big push like, oh, dyslexia is such a wonderful gift and you have all these strengths and talents. And there's a woman who studies and works with at-risk populations, and she says it is absolutely not a gift if you're poor. So this is actually a huge issue right now with something called the science of reading. We're really trying to push out the best way to teach reading to all learners, much less someone who has dyslexia, so we make sure we're inclusive. And so they have a big push with equity in education, and they're making incredible strides in Mississippi and Tennessee and Arkansas. So go take a look at what those states are doing, but they're pushing out some really amazing science of reading things, and they're seeing their scores go way up across the board. This is some of the research they're finding where, you know, if 70% of the kids at your school are not reading, then whether you have dyslexia or not is really kind of not the biggest point. The point is, why are 70% not reading? So there's a big push to try to change the way that we approach reading to be matching better with what we know works. So 95% of people should be able to read, and yet we have a pretty large population of people who can't. And so there's this big push right now with the Yale Centers of Centers. I'm going to get my sequencing out of order. The Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity are doing quite a lot, and they're pushing for some federal mandates. And they have gotten some federal law to help people that have dyslexia have screening in prisons, so they can start to get help. So we can really make a big difference if we can promote the science of reading, promote some of the work that people are doing with trying to make sure that the research and all the things we've learned, getting that professional development, getting it out to the people that need it. And to start to view dyslexia not just like as a discrepancy, like on an IQ versus your achievement, which is that's important and helpful, because that helps you know if you need an IEP. But whether you need an IEP or not, you can have dyslexia. And one of the best ways to look for dyslexia is family history, because as I was saying to you, 50% inheritability for the phonological awareness problem, 60% inheritability for the orthographic coding problem. So hearing sounds in their order, that's about 50% inheritable. sounds out of, being able to remember those letter patterns is about 60% inheritable. So a big, huge thing you can do is look for a family history, and that will be a huge head start with when people doing assessment. And looking for these processing issues, not just looking for the discrepancy and waiting for that discrepancy to form, but looking for these processing issues that you can pick up in kindergarten and first grade. And that's why it's very exciting that there's the new law to screen all kindergarten and first graders, because we have really good tools to be able to catch these kids much earlier. So there's lots of research-based programs out there. There's Orton Gillingham derived ones like Barton, Slingerland, Spalding, and Wilson. There's linguistic derived or speech to print, letters, Linda Bell, and Wired for Reading. And I would say you should, if you're a teacher, you should take these. I'm not going to say one's better than the other. The researchers were looking at that, trying to decide which is the best one. And they said, no, it's not about the best one. It's more about that big five I told you, like the 5 things that programs need to have. All of these programs have those big 5. It starts to become more and more about how well does the person you're working with know the program they're using. And many of the best teachers and tutors I've met are trained in multiple programs. So after 14 months of tailored instruction, Max was reading at grade level, actually a little bit above. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. And some of you were asking questions about comorbidities, and I actually have a chart. And then there was, ironically, I'm going to tell on myself, ironically, I misspelled comorbidity. And my friend caught it. So we're going to get that fixed and get that sent out to you. But the comorbidity for attention deficit is, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, it's 40%. For anxiety and depression, it's 20%. For dysgraphia, it's 70%. So twice exceptional is pretty high as well. The other one that shows up is something called specific language impairment. And that one is really a harder one to wrap our arms around because it's probably underdiagnosed right now. But they said 7 to 8% of kindergartners get diagnosed with a specific language impairment, and about half of them go on to have dyslexia. So I'm going to let Nikki help me with any other questions that.
Yeah, there's a question if you know if there's a comorbidity with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. It's really hard to say. I didn't see any literature that gave a really big Venn diagram with, but it's hard to say. It kind of goes back to the specific language issue, because I feel like kids that are on the spectrum, some of them also have language processing issues, and then that can cause problems with reading. What was somebody who's really teasing it out is they're looking for these low order processing problems affecting word level issues, rather than it's the difference between having them do reading comprehension and listening comprehension. And if their listening comprehension is intact, that leads you more toward dyslexia. Any other questions? What's the best what kind of specialist do you recommend to separate out or to diagnose? I guess?
Yeah, this is something that's interesting that's changing. I know that with the new law, they're starting to bring in some screeners that are really good, and I am so excited. Because up until then, you didn't have it where school psychs would look at these processing issues. It wasn't required. It's not on part of the WAC. It's not part of their expectations. And they're so busy that they wouldn't do it. And now the screeners are starting to come in where they're having some really good screeners that can pick this stuff up in kindergarten. With that said, the people that I will send, if my friend came to me, I send them to private people to do diagnostic work, because they do a really thorough job where they look at all these different processing issues and they cross-check them with other different issues that might be causing. And so this is, again, where it comes in with equity. What about people who can't afford to go have that testing done? And there's also a problem with right now, there's this expectation and this conflation with IDA or like having qualifying for an IEP and needing a 504. And so there's this expectation that someone with dyslexia has to get retested every 3 years. And that really makes no sense because you don't outgrow it. And it's very expensive to get tested every 3 years if you're getting it done outside the school. So hopefully they will continue to sort this out. But if you were to come to me, I have a list of diagnosticians I really like on my website. You can look at my resources if you're in the local area, and you are because you're in Shoreline.
So would you recommend that as a first step if a parent suspects there might be an issue?
I think I would say yes, and so I think that the first thing I would do is talk to the school and see if you can get that process started, because a lot of times the schools can do a whole bunch of that testing right there at the school and you don't have to pay all this extra money. And then you can get outside testing to maybe fill in holes and gaps that the school didn't look at. The other problem right now, and I'll just tell you, it's a big problem. It's a big problem all of us are having with everywhere. We're all full. I get phone calls all the time. I'm full. My wait list is full. The people I know that do diagnostic work are 6 to 8 months, sometimes a year out. So I always tell people, get on that list. You can always decide later you don't need it anymore, but get on that list in case, eventually down the line, it might be really helpful to have that.
There's a question about, are those screenings happening this year in Shoreline schools?
I don't know if anybody from Shoreline can answer that. I know that they kicked it because of COVID and they had to, because how could you do the testing when everybody is in mask? You guys, how can you do work on phonological and your mouth and stuff when everybody's in mask? So I have to say, I'm a little concerned about my littles learning how to read and they can't see my mouth. Have you noticed that when you have your mask on, you have to say, my name is Laura with an L? Well, you're not Laura, but you know what I mean? Like, people can't hear you because I don't hear as well if I don't see the mouth working. We don't realize that. Maybe we do more so now. So I think it's next year that screening comes into play. They've got a little more runway. There's some really good screeners. One of my colleagues was on that. There's a state level committee and they did like a really thorough analysis and they have a recommendation and the stuff they have is really good. I've also heard the new dibbles, which schools are using, has really improved. They used to have a little bit of a speed element to it that they've kind of pulled out. And now my rapid naming kids are not getting booted too soon. Any other questions?
I shared your website in the chat because there was a request for that. Also some questions about what if kids are older than the years that are currently being screened at kindergarten, first grade.
Okay. So I will tell you that, I'll tell you my story. So I was a freshman in college. I had a lot of problems especially in high school. School was just so confusing to me because I was either really good at it or really struggling. And, but I was an athlete. So I got into UC Irvine, go Anteaters, zot, zot, any other Anteaters, and immediately started to fail out of school. I mean, I loved it there, but I was so struggling to keep up. And I had a professor pull me aside my second quarter freshman year and asked me if I had a learning issue. And I'm like, I don't think so, but I got tested because in the back of my mind, I'm like, something's not right. And I ended up getting tested and got diagnosed at age 19. And I got accommodations and I became a straight A student. I worked my butt off, but it started, that's what kind of like, how did they miss me? Why didn't anybody do any of this stuff when I was young? And it kind of got me onto this path, but it was not too late for me. And I'm so grateful for that professor. I'm so grateful for accommodations, but it would have been so much easier for me to have had this when I was younger. So it is never too late. If you really want something, you can go after it, you can get it. We can do a lot with it. But you're probably, going to maybe need to step outside of what you would get in the schools. It just really depends on what school you're going to and what kind of program they're using. But it's hard for schools to catch kids up once they get behind because kids tend to kind of go in this arc. And when you do intervention, it's more of a stepstone where kids can kind of do these big jumps and then stabilize in big jumps. So if I had an older child, I would probably pursue something outside if I could.
What age is too young to start?
I don't like to start. If I get a kindergartner, I usually, so what I'll tell you, if I get a phone call from a parent I'll say what I'm listening for. Are there any attention issues? Because if we don't address attention issues, then everything I'm going to do is vulnerable to not transfer. And that's not just me saying it from my clinical observations. That's actually research that shows that there's a group of kiddos with all these really good programs that work really well, except for this group of kids didn't make progress, and this group didn't make progress, and this group didn't make progress. And all those groups, when they analyze what they have in common, it was attention deficit. So we know that attention deficit, especially the inattentive type, is the most common to have a comorbidity. It's pretty high at 40%. So I want to look for attention issues and address them early if I can, because it's just going to set us up for success. I'm also going to look at their handwriting. I talked about their ability to see the letters in their mind's eye, but it also travels with their ability to form the letters in an efficient manner. So if they have a funky grip or they're making their letters from the top, those are red flags to me, and I send them to, I have an OT that I really like because she can get it done fast. So I say attention, then handwriting, and then me. So if I get a 5-year-old, a lot of times if they're getting to me, it's because it's pretty significant. So somebody's seeing something that's really significant, or they're a younger sibling and mom and dad go, we know what this is. Older brother had this, we're going to catch it earlier. And oftentimes they need handwriting. So I will send those 5-year-olds off for handwriting before they start with me. With that said, I worked with my son when he was 4 years old. I was just very playful and a much slower pace than I would do with my older kids. So by the time he got to first grade, he did fine on his dibbles. He still had dyslexia, but he was able to do, he had 2 years of work. I totally over answered. I apologize.
No,
You asked me for a
perfect.
glass of water.
Great. There's a couple more questions. One, it has a student in 5th grade that's having some problems with reading and writing, and they're wondering what they can do, how to get started.
Well, it's very interesting because we want to figure out why they're having trouble with the reading and writing, because sometimes kids will have just the rapid naming, and those kids will be pretty accurate, but they'll have trouble with those grammar words. And then what happens when they get into reading help is that sometimes people scaffold them back to a passage where they can read at a certain rate. But by scaffolding them back, they no longer are motivated to read the material because the material's not interesting to them. So it's very helpful to kind of get at the bottom of what these processing issues are. With that said, I get somebody who calls me, the wait list to get testing is like 8 months out. I have some things that I can do by just going through this checklist. You know, you guys I've given you some red flags. I have some red flags I have like this PowerPoint on my website. You can kind of go through the red flags and kind of think about like, oh, I'm seeing sounds out of order. Oh yeah, they spelled it. The word is spelled at the top of the page and they spell it 8 ways down below. Red flag for orthographic coding. So I'm seeing all of these red flags. I'm going to go ahead and find somebody who is skilled at working with kids with dyslexia. And you can go to the International Dyslexia Association. They have a referral list, and I have a referral list on my website too, of people that have had certified training and gone through a process that meets the standards of something called ALTA.
Will the universal screenings catch other things that are related, such as dyscalculia or dysgraphia?
No, they're going to just be looking at probably that phonological piece, and that's it. So they're going to be really honed in on that, which is good because that is the core deficit. But you will potentially have kids that will, there's a term in the reading literature called stealth dyslexia, where they either they've been working with someone like me, or they kind of, sometimes when kids are really, really bright, they can beat the test. So they may not get caught. So it's just a screening, and all it is a screening. So you're going to have some false negatives and some false positives. It doesn't take the place of mommy intuition. Your gut's telling you something, you listen to it. Other questions?
Do you know if the science of reading and all of this information will be taught to teachers in their trainings?
I don't know exactly what Shoreline's plan is. I do know that at one point they had a dyslexia task force group that was meeting. I think that it got somewhat stymied because of COVID. It made, I mean, you guys know this. We all hands on deck, helping kids get lunch, get converted over. So a lot of our plans that we were on and tracks we were on before COVID got delayed. But it'd be worth something to look back into, because maybe they're getting back to a place where they can start forming that again and deciding what they're going to be doing. I do have a fair number of teachers, different principals that support their teachers to take my course from all over the district. I've seen teachers, I've been in, you know, my kids went to Syrie, so I've been in Syrie and I've been in Echo Lake and I've been in, you know, Ridgecrest. I've been all over. I'm back in the days when I got to do this in person. Any other questions?
Ananda, did you have a question?
Not so much a question. I just wanted to add on to the what do you do to bring it up with your teachers. Bring it up with, and I don't know, maybe Dr. Reyes can chime in, but if or your school principal, if there's an issue and it's not getting caught and you can't figure out what it is, there is a whole process through the school to help with that. You don't have to figure it out on your own. And things like English as a second language can sometimes obscure. A teacher might miss it because they might attribute it to that, or a dozen other things. Other disabilities could obscure it. But if in your gut you feel like that's what's going on, talk about it and reach out. And there is help available through the school, but sometimes you need to be the one to raise your hand and point out what you're seeing that may not be seen at school.
I would agree, Ananda, thank you. I think it's really important that parents really reach out and do everything you can to advocate to make sure that we understand on the receiving end that this is critical and it's important for us to be responsive. And I know that all of our staff, that's what they want to do. And so, you know, persevere, connect with us, check in with us. And I noticed that the person that submitted the question submitted it in Spanish. So I'm happy to respond in Spanish here verbally, but I don't know if the parent needs that or not. And I believe the parent is still here with us. So I'm happy to do that if it's
Susan, absolutely, Dr. Reyes. Like if you would, that would be great.
Okay. La persona que puso en el chat la pregunta acerca de su estudiante de quinto grado. Creo que todavía está aquí en la junta y mi comentario o respuesta de parte del distrito es de que es muy importante que hable con los maestros o el maestro, maestra de su estudiante y puede también comunicarse con el director o la directora de la escuela o con alguno de los consejeros. Pero también soy Susana, soy la superintendente del distrito, puede comunicarse conmigo directamente también y puedo ayudarle a conectarse con el director o la maestra.
Gracias, Susana. Mi nombre es Isabel y sí, mi hijo está recibiendo ayuda en lectura y escritura en la escuela. Apenas nos pusieron como en una reunión para hablar con la maestra que está ayudando a mi hijo y él está viendo con IEP y pero pues todavía yo no veo que él avance. Él tiene problemas en deletrear las letras, en escribir las letras, confunde mucho las palabras. Y por eso vine a esta reunión para saber más un poco de qué es la dislexia y cómo pueden detectar eso, quién hace los exámenes, si el doctor o los maestros lo mandan a un lugar para que le hagan el test. No sé, pues.
Yeah. Lo que voy a sugerirle, puse en el chat mi número de teléfono y mi correo electrónico. Si quiere mandarme la información directamente, yo puedo conectarla bien con su maestro o el director o directora de su escuela, ¿ok?
Ajá.
I'm sharing my number and my email so that the parent can connect with me directly and I can help her navigate the process.
And
with this.
It's really important to know that dyslexia is something that they find it in every language. So these processing problems impact literacy in every language. So, and you're right. Sometimes people just assume, oh, it's because, English isn't their first language and that's what it is. And, that's going to make it even more challenging, but it also could be a yes and. So making sure that we, talk with that parent and have, get information about, whatever information they can share about what they're noticing at home and what they're noticing in the native language will be so helpful. But I will say that Spanish has 5 vowel sounds and 5 vowel letters that match on. We have 18. And so if your baby brain paired away, being able to hear it and the difference, then it doesn't matter if you have dyslexia or not. You can relearn it and you can learn what your mouth is doing to make it, but you're going to need some explicit instruction in that phonics to be able to make that connection. So I'm so glad she was able to ask that question.
That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. We have one other.
I had to correct my email address. So sorry, I re-entered it. But I think the parent will see that.
Okay, thank you. There was actually one other question in Spanish that came directly to me, which I will do my best to translate if you're willing to. I'm sure if you're okay with them contacting you directly as well, or try to answer. But the question was, my son is 9 and they have a diagnosis from Children's Hospital. At school, their child receives some help for learning problems, but no help for dyslexia and dyspraxia. I guess maybe just requesting some suggestions.
Laura, would you have suggestions that I might be able to translate, or is it what I just share with the parent to connect with me? And
yeah, I think that what we want to do is we want to make sure that we get the coordination between whatever's going on with ELL and then also coordinating with any support that can happen with dyslexia. Those two parties need to communicate with each other and help support each other, and that's going to maximize being able to help that person as quickly as possible. So if you could facilitate that, and helping the parent navigate like how to get that connection, that would be really helpful.
Para la otra persona que puso otro comentario en el chat directamente a la señora Nikki, también como comenté, mi número de teléfono está en el chat y también mi correo electrónico lo volví a poner porque lo había escrito con un error, pero ya está correcto. Puede comunicarse conmigo directamente y les ayudo a comunicar su pregunta con su maestro o director o directora. Gracias.
Thank you so much. So we have reached past 8:30, so maybe just wind down with the last couple of questions, if that's okay with you, Laura.
Sure.
And I've seen Jessica has put just a short survey, link to a survey in the chat here, and it would be super helpful if you guys could take a minute to respond to that, as it helps us moving forward with our speakers and presentations.
Laura, it would also be great. Can you tell folks how to reach you if they need to or want to? I know that that's something that when we were talking to you, I know you like to connect with parents, or if they have any.
Yes. Yeah, you're welcome to email me, and my email, and maybe Nikki can put this in for me. It's laura@wiredforreading.com. You can also look for different tutors in your area. You can search by location on our website. But I also recommend that you go to the International Dyslexia Association, because they have a broader selection of different people that are trained in multiple methods. You'll get the people that are trained in Wired and mine, but you'll get people that are trained in Slingerland, some of those other really amazing programs. So definitely check out it's called WAIDA, WAIDA. There's a B in there. WAB. So it's Washington branch of IDA, WABIDA. .org, and they are fantastic resource. They're a local branch and they're very active, and they have all sorts of free trainings and free workshops that they do. And so I would definitely check them out. And then there's all sorts of wonderful groups. The Science of Reading has a group on Facebook. There's a Washington State Science of Reading and a national and an international. So you can check all of those out. They're very good, a wonderful resource of local talent. There's going to be some free presentations and workshops coming up. So there's all sorts of different wonderful ways that you can find out more. And that's also something that I can make a list, and you can also look at my resources and I'll give it to you when you got some goodies coming. You got my chapter coming, the comorbidity spelled right chart coming, 2 different versions of it. So look for those coming soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. I just really appreciate your time, and it was a great presentation. I learned a lot. So I wanted just to reiterate, so I will be sending everyone that signed up for this speaker tonight, our speaker, by pre-registering, you give us your email address, so then we can send you out this information. So the other thing, we did record it tonight, and we are hoping to actually close caption that in Spanish. So for our Spanish listeners, we're hoping to do that as well. So let's see. Again, thank you for presenting this topic. And you'll find that recording is on shorelineспecialneedspta.org. So thank you so much for everyone. I'm going to stop recording.